Winter is coming.
Might just be the cold.
Winter is coming.
It's cold outside.
You don't know cold.
Winter is coming for him.
It's either me or this cold, and it doesn't appear to be going anywhere.
And winter is coming.
You look cold, boys.
Tis a bit nippy.
Winter is coming. Winter is coming.
That's cold. Winter is coming.
I'm cold.
It's cold and it's wet.
Winter is coming.
You're crying because you're cold?
You're a long way from home. And winter is coming.
I imagine you might be rather cold.
And winter is coming.
Oh, that's all right, I'm fine.
You're not. You're freezing.
Well, winter is here, and of course, winter means Russ Winter. And we're going to have Russ on here in just a second. And join us for his end-of-month appearance, which I always look forward to, because I really look forward to playing that intro. But before we do, we have just a little bit of business to take care of, and that, of course, is a shout-out and a mention to our sponsor, and that is True Hemp Science. And True Hemp Science, of course, is probably the best hemp solution or the best CBD solution I found on the internet. And it just so happens to be that the guy that runs the business is a friend. And so that's where you get a real twofer, right? You find something that's really good for your body, your system, and guess what? You know, it's one of your friends that actually is engaged in actually running the business, which is great. Let me take you into a True Hemp Science world. So there we go. There's the homepage for True Hemp Science, and if you are interested in CBD to deal with things like inflammation, sleep, lack of sleep, general attentiveness, depending upon what type of CBD you're interested in. You can go gummies, you can go moon dust. If you're interested in topical CBD, if you're interested in CBD for your pets, it's all here. This is your one-stop shop. And if you're listening on the podcast side of things, the place you want to go to is truehempscience.com/ref/23. That's truehempscience.com/ref/23. And if you spend $100, you'll get free product thrown in. And Chris is always great at throwing in some free goodies. Like if you don't get any gummies, he might throw you, 3 or 4 gummies and a few other things on the side. So you get that little, it's kind of like Christmas too. You never know what you're going to get, but you're going to get more. And if you spend $150 or more, of course, you get free shipping. So what you want to do is type in 15MINS, and that is your code to get the free goodies. And with that, let's tarry not, and let's bring on our guest, Mr. Russ Winter. We're going to unmute him. We're going to bring him on camera, and all the way from the Czech Republic. There he is. There's the man.
Always got to get that thing lined up right. There we go.
There you go. I guess Giuseppe was accused
joking
you
with me. Yeah,
joking with me. The incredibly
smoking and joking
man.
with me, because I can't multitask.
Yeah. Well, you're looking good. So give us a rundown of Thanksgiving in Prague.
Thanksgiving was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There is no Thanksgiving here.
What do you do? Because this is not the first Thanksgiving. Obviously, you've been away from the States.
Oh, I think
how do you do
initially
it?
I kind of sought out turkey. You could get, there's a restaurant that I like called Caverna Adria, not far from here. It serves turkey. So I went over, I got their meal, some broccoli, but just me, there's no Thanksgiving here. But
Right.
I just got out of the friggin' hospital.
Yeah, I know. Got to give some thanks for that, right?
I guess. I don't know if my ordeal is over. I mean, I probably could give you some details because I think the people on your show are nice people.
Yeah.
They're friends of Russ Winter.
Yeah.
When I was talking about my health over there at Revolution Radio, there's a kind of a posse of jerks over there that really jumped on me.
Yeah.
Didn't want to hear it. I understand that, but that's okay. I just won't go back.
Right.
I just won't go back over there.
Yeah. No, this is a great group of people. And
people have been asking me how I'm doing, and I've been kind of quiet, but the actual experience at the hospital, let me just relay it to you.
Sure.
So I go in there on the 9th of November for the surgery, and I'm told it's going to be like 2 or 3 days observation in the hospital. They leave the catheter in for a while. And I'm just kind of almost going crazy to get the catheter out. Take the catheter out, take the catheter out, take the catheter out. It's kind of the aim of all this. And then about the third day, next thing you know, I'm being wheeled into intensive care, and they have a heart monitor hooked up to me. So somehow during the surgery, they'd released this really nasty bacteria into my system, into my blood.
Yeah.
And it got into my lungs. I was getting pneumonia. On Sunday night, I was really in serious trouble. Felt like I was getting pneumonia. I had a heart monitor. I had arrhythmia going on.
I had no idea.
Oh, it was unbelievable. How did that happen?
MRSA is a thing, right? I mean, that's probably not what they named it, but that's it's in that territory that MRSA,
kind of like sepsis.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I was just kind of out of it. Had no idea why they were. I thought they were taking me in to get my catheter out. Just out of it. And I got a fever. And man, that one night they were really observing me. They had 2 nurses in there. A cardiologist kept popping in, and I felt like I was in really serious trouble. And they pumped me with 6 days, the next 6 days of antibiotics, drip, intravenous drip, which killed it. Took care of everything, and plus wiped out all my gut bacteria and everything else.
Biome goes to hell.
And so when I got home. This isn't over. I was on that catheter for too long, 4 months. And so now I have incontinence, and I have to do exercises, try to restore my pelvic floor and get the muscles reset again. I don't know how long that's going to take. They don't really tell you, how long, for a month, 3 months. What am I dealing with?
Yeah. Right. Well, this is one of the things now in modern medicine is that they don't really want to be predictive because they don't want to be held to a potential outcome, right? Like, well, we're not sure. We don't really have a timetable for that.
That each patient is different, all this kind of stuff.
And I think a lot of it has to do with liability. I think liability is a big part of it, that they don't want people to they don't want to be on the hook for making a proclamation, and the proclamation doesn't come true, right? I would say this though. I think even though it sounds like it was really an ordeal, I think you're lucky you weren't in an American hospital.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, because they released you real quick. That's right. They send you home right away. That's what my son was saying.
Well, in an American hospital too, though, I think the chances now of being managed out are far greater, right?
Yeah, because they'll send you home, and then next thing you know, you're at home in big trouble.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and you look at the creation of Obamacare, one of the people that was involved in the creation of Obamacare was Zeke Emanuel, like one of the Emanuel brothers, like Ari Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel, Zeke Emanuel. And I remember during that time and really following where things were going with ACA, and Zeke Emanuel is like, he's talking about like death panels, right? This is the guy who's writing Obamacare. And then he just recently, about a year ago during COVID, he said, well, nobody should really live past more than 66 or 67. I don't plan on it. Oh, right. Well, we'll see where you are after that. But this has been hardwired into the American healthcare system now. You get to a certain point and you don't line up like with the actuarial, you get managed out, right? So I think you were actually.
Well, I think so too. I think they saved my life, because I think I was in big trouble on that Sunday night, and they really hit me real hard. The only problem with here is the language difficulty and not really understanding what's going on. There's confusion.
Right. Well, now you have the spirit of big techs watching over you while you rehab, right?
Yeah, he went through a lot of this prostate stuff too. So
right,
Thank you, Dad. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and according to you, big techs didn't have a whole lot of. He didn't have a whole lot of patience with dogs, from what I understand. Right. If people don't know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, you're probably right. If it's in the United States, I would have gone home way too early and probably had a bad outcome, really bad outcome.
Right. Then you'd have gone back again, and then you would probably have gotten
but I needed to be in there a lot sooner taking this catheter out. I mean, if anybody goes through this in the future, make sure they get these catheters out. Don't let them leave them in there for 4 months, because now
I can't even imagine that.
Problems. Yeah, whole new set of problems. I can't
imagine that. Yeah. Well, we're glad you're here. We're thankful, Russ, that you're here with us today and creating content on your website. And we get to talk to you once a month here. So you and I have been talking about this for a while, and we're going to start off with Sigmund Fraud. And where do we even start with Freud? I mean, this is a guy that lays down the theoretical psychoanalytical map for the 20th century.
Well, I think we start with his own mental condition, and what a neurotic, strange, feminine Jewish man, and really the lowest order.
Yeah, why don't we start there?
He's just a freak. He's kind of like a little bit like Alfred Kinsey, which we've discussed. We've discussed. If anybody hasn't heard that interview, that was a classic that we did.
Yep.
And it kind of ties into the same brood of characters. But from an early age, his personal neurotic dysfunctions manifested themselves in unusual behavior pattern and psychosomatic ailments, particularly affecting the mouth, genitals, and the anus. So that sounds very Kinseyan too. So at the age of 7, problem child Ziggy walked into his parents' bedroom and deliberately urinated on the floor. He fainted often. He suffered lifelong indigestion, constipation. He suffered severe phobias about riding in trains, about death, about visiting Rome. More often than not, he was chronically depressed and bad temper. He had no love of humanity. He looked at humanity as specimens, or he was a psychopath.
Yeah. Well, clearly, how would I describe him? Psychopaths, I think there's an interesting difference between psychopaths and sociopaths. And this is how it was described to me once, is that psychopaths will do something that is egregious or damaging, socially out of line. But at times, psychopaths will actually display a quality of remorse, or they'll display this weird quality of regret, but they can't help themselves. They continue to be on this path of doing damage to others, but it's not as if they don't have this weird relationship with the thing that they do, whereas sociopaths don't have that. Sociopaths are able really to compartmentalize and either explain away their aberrance or forgive themselves for their aberrance. So, but I think Freud is probably more in the sociopathic realm, in that he can lie to himself, right? He can lie to others.
Well, he didn't have any emotions, which is kind of a classic sociopath and
That's
psychopathic
right.
trait.
Yeah.
He just didn't care.
Yeah.
He really didn't.
Yeah.
So he goes to the University of Vienna in 1873. It took him 3 years longer than normal to complete his medical studies. His doctoral dissertation was on the spinal cord of lower fish. I think that says a lot.
Right, exactly.
Focused on the studies of the testicles of eels. So the guy's a degenerate.
It's so weird. It's so weird that this is the training ground for psychology, right? For psychiatry. Like, that's the training ground. The testicles of an eel. It's like, it doesn't get much more primordial.
Yeah, and in all
strange.
fairness, some of his biggest critics in later years, the people who really unloaded on him, are Jewish. I'll have to mention that for some people that think that this is all
well. What's
one-sided.
interesting is he declares himself an atheist.
Right? Yeah,
right.
right. He's a Sabbatean Frankist, is what he is.
Well, he shares that with Marx. He and Marx have the same kind of relationship and background with their Jewish ancestry and their kind of, traditional Jewish brethren. Like, Marx rejects it. Marx comes from a family of rabbinical scholars and teachers, and it starts with his father and trickles down to Marx, and then they're out, right? But the Sabbatean part kicks in. It's like, we're going to be antithetical. We're going to be the outcasts, and Freud is in the same camp.
Yeah, the psychoanalyst Sandor Ferenczi reports a statement by Freud that Freud said to him in 1932, that he referred to his patients as rabble and only good for money earning and studying. So that's sociopathic.
Right.
And then he became, in effect, a snake oil salesman. He'd been experimenting with cocaine, really big on cocaine, and using it on himself and his fiancee, Martha Bernays. Of course, the Bernays name is very big in all this as well.
Yep.
And he called cocaine his magic carpet, eventually thrust it on all, including sisters, friends, patients, colleagues, everyone. So that's his big claim to fame.
Right.
And it's funny that they just hide all this.
Oh yeah. No, it all gets
washed over.
It all gets washed over and buried, because let's just, let's play the game here. If you go into Freud, the foundations of his theories, who he was, his motivations for doing things, which were really based on money to keep himself in cocaine in a lot of ways, it would undo the entire foundation of psychoanalytical theory and practice. Like, what would that do? Right? It invalidates like decades.
The whole industry. Yeah, whole industry.
Oh my God, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. So it's like, yeah, I mean, Freud he's that one little piece, like, you pull on it, you tug on it, everything comes tumbling down. By the way, Karl Marx was born on May 5th and Freud was born on May 6th. So they share a very similar birthday, and they're astrologically, that makes them both Tauruses. So they're both very into materiality, right? And the biggest thing for Freud, besides cocaine, was money.
And sex and deviant sex.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. He was a big tobacco head. He loved smoking, and he was very into cigars, right?
Yeah, and so is Marx.
Yeah. Yeah.
Both of them
interesting.
So anyway, Martin Gross, the author of the Psychological Society, writes that no one has yet evaluated the hallucinatory effects of cocaine on Freud's mind during the formative years of psychoanalysis. Really? How come? Why haven't you evaluated that? Seems pretty fundamental. Somebody probably should write a thesis on that one. Of course, it would be rejected. So Freud's friend Ernest von Markov had become a despairing addict after Freud had prescribed cocaine as medicine for a hand tumor. And there's no doubt the addiction brought about his early death, a friend of his. Michael Onfray, an author who wrote a comprehensive and critical monologue on Freud in 2010, documented deaths from his gross misdiagnosis and quack treatments. He went to Paris to study under the French neurologist Charcot. Charcot was interested in the study of hysteria.
Right. That was his mentor.
Right. And hysteria involved women mostly.
Right.
It's kind of an affliction caused by irritation of the womb.
Yeah.
Charcot believed that hypnotism was the answer to such personality dysfunction. Hypnotism is a tool. I mean, I'm not going to say that's not a factor, but
mesmerism was really big back then. Like this whole thing with Anton Mesmer was huge. And it was more common in a lot of ways than people understand. He made a huge impact on medicine and metaphysics. So that doesn't surprise me.
So then he plagiarized his colleague Joseph Breuer and collaborated on a book, Studies in Hysteria, which was kind of the ground establishing the font or the ground for psychotherapy, talking to people, talking to them calmly and bringing out their so-called suppressed thoughts. So they're really into suppressed, repressed thinking.
Right. Yeah. Well, you and I talked about this. Maybe it was on the last show or the show before the last one, or maybe it was in private. I forget. But Freud discovered that when he was working with the young woman of Viennese society, so a lot of his clients had money, and they would send their daughters to him because they were experiencing hysteria, right? And when he found out that the reason why they were experiencing hysteria was that they'd been sexually molested, he figured out what was wrong. Well, there's a reason why your daughters are all flipped out. It's because you've diddled them. I have it. I figured it out. And then he went back to some of those parents and confronted them, and it didn't go well. And he realized that if he was going to continue to have clients, which was his bread and butter, he needed to come up with a theory to explain away why they were experiencing hysteria. And that was the Oedipal theory. And so the Oedipal theory comes out of a cover-up, which is basically, sexual molestation and predation from the parent to the child.
Yeah, and he had to come up with other stick too, because he had, for instance, this quack notion that, again, he borrowed this from his associates. And so he had a homosexual lover, Dr. Wilhelm Fleiss, an ear and nose doctor. So he figured out that sexual dysfunctions were caused by disturbances in the mucous membranes of the nose. And Freud had Fleiss operate on his nose for nasal infection as an experiment. And so, not surprisingly, he continued to be plagued by bad health, migraines, nightmares, heart trouble, and eventually mouth cancer, which is related to smoking we just mentioned.
Right.
And then towards the end of his life, he suffered a severe operation of the jaw, resulting in his upper palate being artificially replaced. So he didn't take good care of himself at all.
Well, he was high on blow most of the time. He thought he was indestructible. Right.
And then he turned to the interpretation of his personal dreams, and he had this Freudian tendency to focus on himself and his own bizarre thoughts, very much like Kinsey. So he transferred his own degeneracy and strangeness and apply it to the world, just like Kinsey did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And both those guys did it very successfully. And then we're living this to the very day. And it's kind of a lot of how modernism works and how modern thinking works.
Right.
So,
yeah.
One dream he claimed to experience was with two birdmen laid his mother on the bed. He theorized this represented his boyhood desire to kill his father, This is the Oedipus complex.
Right.
Have sex with his mother. Come on, really?
Two Birdmen. Okay. And
Come on. I mean, the only time you ever hear something like this is, are these serial killers? That's about it. They think that.
Well,
way.
I mean, you bring up a really interesting point because clearly Freud suffers from some deep pathologies, and instead of acting out on them and either being a serial killer or somebody who's a real threat to society, what he does is he seeks to legitimize his pathologies and then make a career out of trying to heal those pathologies in others, which I don't know if one is worse than the other, right? I mean, one, you get a serial killer or somebody who's just a complete and utter raging sociopath, or you get somebody who has somehow found a way to tame those bizarre impulses and then create a career out of them, thus ruining the lives of other people along the way. I don't know what's better or worse, honestly.
I think Freud affected a lot more people.
No, I think he did too. I mean, the other thing he did, and I wasn't aware of this, but when he would have these hysterical women come to him, he would outsource them to like this one guy who was a gynecologist, right? And the guy would give them hysterectomies and clitorectomies to deal with their hysteria. Like this is how like they would manage stuff like this back then. It completely barbaric.
Yeah, he says that he puts forth that most people were inherently bisexual. That's Kinsey again. That's exactly his philosophy.
Yep.
And from the get-go, he began to develop the almost inevitable Jewish characteristic of the fear of anti-Semitism. So these people are just paranoid about this anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And so he really incorporated into people's psyche. And so he adopted as his boyhood hero Hannibal, who he managed to be a Semitic hero who fought against the era's traditional anti-Semites, the Romans, and Oliver Cromwell, who he identified with the Jewish emancipation movement. And he had a neurosis about going to Rome. So he would travel to Italy a lot, but he never was able to visit Rome. In his book, he described how often he dreamed of conquering Rome, just as his hero Hannibal had tried to do, and he offered the following explanation. To my youthful mind, Hannibal and Rome symbolized the conflict between the tenacity of Jewry and the organization of the Catholic Church. Thus, to wish to go to Rome had become my dream, like a dream life, a cloak and symbol for a number of other passionate wishes. Their realization was to be pursued with all perseverance and single-mindedness of the Carthaginians, but he never made it to Rome. He couldn't overcome his paranoia.
Yeah, that's
weird. Yeah,
it is weird. And Hannibal, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he from Tunisia?
Right, Carthage.
And he was, from what I also understand, he was probably black, right? I think.
Well, I think the Carthaginians were kind of extension of Phoenicia, so they were actually from that sort of Holy Land or Middle East neck of the woods, probably somewhat in an ancient sense, probably tied into the Hebrews.
Right.
So then he argued that humans go through different stages of sexual development. The oral stage, which infants derive pleasure from sucking on their mother's breast. All right, maybe. But then the anal stage, where pleasure focuses on bowel movements.
Yeah.
And then the phallic stage, where the erogenous zone switches to genitals. And so he's just focused on this shit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, the whole backbone, the whole spine of the modern psychoanalytical movement is derived from somebody with serious pathologies, really serious pathologies, and covering them up. And even with like hysteria, they found apparently that some of the women besides being molested, some of the hysteria was actually rooted in some form of an organic disease or disorder, right? Like there was actually something going on in their body physically that was causing them to have these hysterical bouts. And even when they found out, whatever that was, it could be a lack of like a certain, I don't know, mineral or vitamin or whatever it was. Even when they found out that that was the case, Freud refused to redact his theories on hysteria, right? It's like, it's right here. This is one of the reasons why you treat this person with X, Y, or Z, and they get better. It has nothing to do with what's going on in the deeper recesses of their psyche. He refused to do that.
Yeah, his first diagnosis of the Oedipus complex was as a 5-year-old boy in 1909. He felt that the boy was afraid of horses, which he says is a penis symbol, because he really feared his father. He feared the horses would bite off his own little penis, fear of castration by his father. What?
Yeah.
Freud obviously experienced Oedipal lust himself, a disturbance that non-Freudians, such as child psychiatrist Stellar Chase of New York University, believes only affects a very small number of children. But Freud then suffered the delusion that his abnormality was normal in university. Well, that's Kinsey again.
Mm-hmm.
And probably more than just Kinsey. I mean, there's John Money, there's all these freaks.
Right.
All these freaks that are really in power could control the world now.
Well, it's interesting because they were advanced through the promotion of aberrance, right? I mean, this is how they were advanced. They weren't advanced through the promotion of character or morality or self-determination, right? They were all advanced because they were on the ground floor of some form of aberrance. And that's what they have in common.
Yeah, he said that he argued that severe depression was narcissistic because it is a form of hatred against others and because it's misdirected against oneself on account of the social taboo on open displays of hatred against loved ones. Eventually, he concluded that the aim of all life is death. So basically, he formed a death cult to arrive at a condition that is totally devoid of all tension, stresses, or strains. Well, yeah, death will kind of relieve you of all that. And when the National Socialists took over in Germany and Austria, he got his comeuppance. His books were declared heretical, publicly burned. He was attacked by the National Socialists as the founder of Jewish, what they called hypocriticalism, a creed that humiliates man as being an appendage to his sexual organs. Since his death in 1939, a chorus of analysts have chimed in on Freud, and like I say, mostly Jewish, have really unloaded on him.
Interesting.
So when his biographer first met him, he observed, "I dimly sensed some slight feminine aspect in his manner and movements." Modern critics say that, well, he was bisexual.
Right.
Modern critics suggest that present-day Freudians are influenced by Freudian's feminine passive feelings so much that they regard masculine assertiveness and aggression as a neurotic manifestation. Well, isn't that true of how people think today?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
He said that Voth's claimed that his entire profession, by making what he called the neurotically troubled Freud a model. These driving needs have infiltrated the psyche of millions of people as well, making much of our personalities in his image. By offering his catalog of foibles as a symbol of normality, Freud achieved immortality. He has successfully projected his personality and style of thoughts onto much of humanity, especially the impressionable American psyche. We all have, some wittingly, others unwittingly, become the children of Sigmund. Hostility was pinned up inside this almost shy, feminine man like a caged feline. He was an angry soul, which hated even when it loved, a trait for which he passed down to us as ambivalence. He perpetually read unconscious hostility into his cases. including that of Dora, the Wolf Man, the Rat Man. He made up these weird characters and kind of magical, imaginary figures, spirits.
Right. Yeah.
He did this even over the reasonable objections of his patients, who said they had felt no such hostility. So if the patient didn't go along with it, he would just said, "Tough shit. This is what you think."
Right.
He later said, "I don't want psychoanalysis to become a Jewish national affair, since too many of us are Jews. However, psychoanalysis is so much grounded in metropolitan Jewish life that Gross, who was a Jew, reported that 11 central states do not have a single psychoanalyst. One Manhattan office building houses more psychoanalysts than 7 states combined. The 2 major analytical capitals are almost 3,000 miles apart, Manhattan and Los Angeles. Curing a patient is commonly called bringing him to be a minch."
That's
so
funny.
Then there's Israeli philosophy professor Leibowitz went even further and held that Freud's psychoanalysis is primarily a Jewish money-making scheme, and that is a bad sign for us Jews. He went on to say the psychoanalysis is entirely in the hand of Jews and has brought unspeakable suffering to millions of people. Then another Jewish guy, Jeffrey Mason, was projects director.
Jeffrey Mason Musieff. This is the guy that really blows the lid. He blows the lid on Freud.
Yeah, because he was the director of the Freud archives. He had full access to his correspondence and his unpublished papers. And so his findings turned him against Freud. He said he covered up child abuse as an issue, claimed that Freud lacked the guts to confront the reality of sexual abuse, exactly what you said.
That's right.
He was kicked out of psychoanalytic societies for his views, meaning Mason.
Yep.
So you can't criticize this skullduggery.
No, and Mason, for again, if you want to look at the argument that you're putting forward, Jeffrey Mason Musieff is also Jewish, right? So it's not like, here's a non-Jew taking a whack at a Jew, right? This is a guy who clearly is like troubled by what he's uncovered.
Well, he was initially a fan. I mean, why else was he picked to be?
It was his life work, you know.
And then he finds out what this guy's really all about.
Yeah, it's like, kudos to him. I can't turn a blind eye to. Jeffrey Mason Musieff is an interesting character because when he was young, his parents had befriended this mystic named Paul Brunton, and Brunton lived with the family, and he had convinced both the parents and Jeffrey that Jeffrey was actually a spiritual avatar, right? So he's got his own like weird backstory with like his strange upbringing and everything, which he ultimately rejects. So he not only rejects his Freudian training, his relation with Freud, but he also rejects this kind of weird like thing that goes on in his youth, where Brunton claims that he's going to be an avatar. He's a very interesting character. And one of the things that he had at his disposal were the full and unredacted letters of Freud, which is where where the smoking gun is his letters.
Yeah, all the skullduggery he's got to see firsthand. So Freud his work has been spun into twisted offshoots and side alleyways. Like the Frankfurt School definitely comes out of Neo-Freudianism.
That's right.
And personified by Herbert Marcuse, who repackaged the Freudian crackpottery into a stream of consciousness book entitled Eros and Civilization.
Yeah.
And Marcuse argued that the old roster of Protestant capitalist ethical vines like productivity, achievement, responsibility, respect for one's fellow man, masculinity, inner strength, integrity were conformist and therefore repressive under the inverted Freudian model. So they got this, there's your repression model that they've developed.
Yeah.
And man, they have really gone. That has not faded away, amazingly enough. It's been kind of brought, dusted off and really put forward aggressively and put sort of these postmodern times.
Right. Yeah. And then we see the byproduct of Freud's ideological and biological offspring in his daughter Anna, who becomes a major psychoanalytical force in America post Freud. Anna Freud is huge, and she takes up his work. And one of the things that was very common,
she was almost kind of like a dictator. So if you didn't
oh
follow
yeah, she
the
was
company
terrible.
line, 100%, she would ostracize you and kind of early council culture.
So a lot of people are familiar with this documentary, but if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's called The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis, who's done a number of documentaries. And in Century of the Self, he actually talks about Anna Freud's role in shaping Freud's legacy with modern psychoanalytical theory in the United States. And her idea of a well-adapted, well-adjusted person was a good citizen that got up, did their job, raised their kids. There was really no mention of church, so I don't think a deep religious life was a part of this, but basically lived their life like, inside the lines, like they didn't color outside the lines. And she was very instrumental in promoting like this idea to corporations, and corporations would pick up on the thread. Not only that, but she was also connected to the United States government. And when the soldiers came home from World War II, they provided both Anna Freud and her colleagues who are now working for the United States government to get in and begin to basically question a lot of these vets who had gone through some very horrific things during World War II. And so out of all of that comes a whole nother kind of download series of batteries and tests. And, the whole thing post Freud, post World War II, kind of the modern American psyche is deeply shaped by Anna Freud.
Yeah,
because of her connection with the United States government and with corporations to basically create the model consumer. You wanted to have a good citizen who is also a model consumer. And you're right, she had a terrible temper and she didn't really tolerate anybody really questioning her ideas. So not only do we get like the front end damage of Freud and his faulty theories, and then we have the mother superior of his school of thought, which is his daughter, literally carrying them out and bolting them to mainstream foundational entities inside this country to ensure the fact that they would have find a place to live. Now, later on, Anna Freud found out she was wrong. And that was a big deal for her. When she looked back on a lot of her theories.
Wow, she fessed up?
Yes, she realized that she was wrong. And she realized that her kind of one size fits all prescription for how humans should be was ultimately not the right one. And I don't know what she did with that. I don't think she went on a book tour or anything and recanted everything she did, but it wasn't as if she was not aware of the fact that she really had made a huge mistake, and she realized it.
Wow.
Even though I think I'm not sure if she was still alive when Moussaieff wrote that book. She might have passed away. But what happens with these people is that they have these foundations that live on, and then they feed off of their legacy, right? They get money off of their legacy. So they want to keep the idea that the person who started the ideas or permeated the culture with these concepts, are untouchable, and that they're bright.
Well, some of the wags out there, if you notice in my comments, some guy came on and says, everybody's pretty much acknowledged that Freud is a quack. Winter. Well, what's new about that? Well, what's new about that is the impact that this guy's had.
That's right.
Yeah. Just because nowadays more people recognize him as a quack. Really? You just kind of shrug your shoulders and walk away, nothing to see here, move along, which is typical of the crap I've had to put up with through the years.
Well, it's okay to say, well, he was a quack, but then you drill down and then you begin to see that the guy was clearly obsessed with masturbation. I mean, he was obsessed with masturbation. Everything, every kind of neurosis kind of flies off of some desire to masturbate, right? And when you drill down and you see that, and that becomes a major foundational piece for Freud and how it begins to, filter through modern psychoanalytical thought and theory, well, then it becomes a really big deal. It's more than just a quack, right? It's like creating, it's like building a building with a foundation that's got serious cracks in it.
Yeah, and you can't just come along many years later and say, "Well, everybody knows this."
Not everybody knows it. Not to the degree that they
not everybody understands the subtleties of how his thoughts have kind of permeated the society.
Yeah, not to the degree. It's easy to say, "Oh yeah," but not to the degree that, like, his quackery was like, what's the word I'm looking for? Institutionalized, right? They institutionalize this stuff, and they basically
and oftentimes subliminally too.
Yeah.
So we got this other character that I think you kind of wanted to talk about last time. This Loretta Bender,
right?
So
when she fill people in.
Well, she was 1897 to 1987. Another Jewish pediatric psychiatrist, and she was really big on human experimentation. And I don't know what draws these people to this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
again, I kind of think it's Sabbatean. You have a chance to get chattel and people to experiment on, and boy, she really did a number on a bunch of children.
Mm-hmm.
So she began working at New York City's Bellevue Hospital in 1930, and she was given 34 the position of senior psychiatrist. And I'd really be curious who put her there. The turtle on the fence post again. I don't really quite know the answer to that question. It's probably like another layer.
Right.
But she was there for 21 years. And so most of her so-called work was diagnosing mental disorders in children. And most of her victims involved abandoned children or children whose parents elected to institutionalize them. And at the time, she was considered one of the leading mental illness society scientists. So the majority of the children at Bellevue were African American.
Right.
And Bender made it quite clear that she felt that African Americans were best characterized by their, quote, capacity for laziness and their ability to dance, both of which she said were features of the specific brain impulses of African Americans.
Right.
So, I mean, today she would be a true racist. My God, Jesus, not a borderline racist, or just, this is serious stuff. This is her thinking. So her favorite diagnosis was childhood schizophrenia. After these children were abandoned and institutionalized, empty suit Dr. Bender noticed that they experienced depression.
Imagine that,
which of course required treatment. So in 1937, as part of a large contingent of Bellevue physicians, including Dr. Wartis and Carl Bowman, and accompanied by Harold Himwich of Albany Medical College, attended a joint meeting of the New York Neurological Society. And the gathering was a virtual who's who of practitioners of insulin and metrazole shock therapy. So these empty suits would then administer massive doses of insulin to induce a coma in a child. So they tortured him.
Yeah.
Typically, injections were administered 6 days a week for about 2 months. Courses of up to 2 years were documented. After
Right.
blood glucose was flushed out of this child, stupor and coma would result. Seizures would sometimes occur before and during coma. Many children would be tossing, rolling, moaning, twitching, spasming, or thrashing about. Vomiting was not uncommon. After the coma, the patients required continuous supervision as there was a danger of hyperglycemic aftershocks. Patients inevitably emerged from the long course of treatment grossly obese. But mortality was about, they would just torture them enough so they didn't quite die. The mortality rate was about 1 to 5%, but they just ruin them.
Don't you think that's a dude? Look at her. That looks like a dude.
Yeah, I know. What kind of a rock did you crawl out from under, Loretta?
This is not uncommon for people during that time, by the way. Yeah, this is just really weird and lived to be quite old, right? I mean,
very influential for a long period
wow.
of time. And so this is what I say in the article. It took a while to discredit this skullduggery. In 1953, British psychiatrist Harold Bourne published a paper called The Insulin Myth in the Lancet, in which he argued that there was no sound basis for believing that insulin coma treatment counteracted schizophrenic process in a specific way. Prior to publishing The Insulin Myth, Bourne had tried to submit the article to the Journal of Mental Science. After 12 months delay, the journal informed Bourne that they had rejected it and told him to get more experience. That just sounds like COVID.
Yeah. What's also interesting too are the kids. It's like, where do these kids come from? Right? Like, where do the kids come from?
A lot of them are street kids. Just
a lot of them are street kids. But even the street kids, where do the street kids come from? This is a whole other rabbit hole that I'm not prepared to go down today. But the influx of children and orphans in the United States in the late 1800s is astonishing, right? It's like they have all these kids showing up, and they have what's called the orphan trains. And the orphan trains are literally stocked with kids and taking them to places in the Midwest so that they can go work for these farm families. And there's a lot of speculation about where these kids might have come from. And some of it does not have to do with the fact that they were just delivered and then put on somebody's doorstep, right? That's a whole other show. But during the turn of the century, the United States is fraught with all of these abandoned and or homeless children. It's very strange. It's a very strange time in our history, and it looks like she's got her pick of the litter there.
Yeah, mostly she kind of went after the blacks.
Right.
I don't know what that's all about. But so after she kind of abused the insulin treatment, she came up with this drug called metrazole, which artificially induces epileptic convulsions. And actually it took the FDA till 1982 to revoke its approval of this drug. And I have I don't know, should we watch that little video of what it's like? You want to play that?
Which one up here?
Metrazole shock therapy on the page.
Let's see, where is it? Yeah, let's watch it. Let me make sure I have the right controls here. Is this going to trigger people? Do I need to give people a trigger warning?
Yeah, this is bad. If everything's got to be hunky dory and happy for you all the time, then probably you shouldn't be listening to us at all.
So I normally don't do this, but you're going to get a trigger warning here because
it made it to YouTube. So they must put some filter on it.
YouTube, I'm sure, will be more than happy to promote awareness around it. There we go.
Got it?
Yeah, it's there. It's playing. Oh, look at him. He's curling up like when
Can
you
you get any
get up,
sound on it?
let me see. The sound is on.
Okay.
Let's try it again. When you played it, was there sound initially?
Maybe not. It's been a while since I watched
I don't
it.
think there's sound to it, but you can tell that when
It was kind of an interesting find to even find this little clip.
it's certainly disturbing. Let me find it again. Give me 1 sec. It's here.
This is kind of how I started to feel in the hospital last week.
So yeah, I mean the sound should be on with this thing. Let's play it again one more time. So when you see he's got like something he's biting on.
Yeah,
right?
they've administered a drug that causes this convulsion.
Yeah, and then he goes into that like if you've ever seen anybody get a really severe concussion, they go into this like claw or crab like hand thing, and you can watch him do it here. Watch this. He's flailing, and then something happens here, and then watch his arms. Look at him. You see him?
Like, you're not. It's not on the screen.
Oh, here, let me share it. My bad.
So 1980 took him till 1982 to withdraw this from the market.
Here we go. We'll play it again. Okay, so he's got, they're doing something here. They're placing something. Now watch his hands. See how they do that? They come into that claw position. See that? That's the same kind of effect that somebody has when they have a serious concussion. And now he goes back into convulsions. This is horrible.
Yeah, this is caused by a drug administered that was used for way too long. And Laura, because of the influence of Loretta Bender, Sabatian Frankist. So then they moved on after that to electric shock treatment, which is
that's a Freudian thing. Freud was into electroshock, right? It's like, well, if it worked well for Freud, well, maybe it'll work well for us.
Well, they used electric shock treatment for a long time. Well into the 70s.
Yeah.
The CIA destroyed all of its files related to electric shock treatments under the rationale that the public would be too outraged over such activities and would not appreciate the agency's objectives behind such work. And so Bender would later go on to develop close links with several of the doctors, including Dr. Ewan Cameron, involved in the CIA and Pentagon behavior modification experiments conducted under the auspices of MKUltra. So I'm sure she was deep into that, probably had some interesting thing to add to that process. She was a proponent of depatterning, electroconvulsive therapy, ETC, then termed annihilation experiments. So-called therapy began in the mid-40s. ECT is still used today, although most modern ECT devices deliver a brief pulse circuit that is thought to cause fewer cognitive effects than the sin wave currents that Bender and her ilk use. I mean, it took so little to impact your brain. I learned that a couple weeks ago.
Right, exactly.
Just from getting into just having some anesthesia administered and having a breathing device stuck down my throat, just fucked me up. I'm still a little bit out of it.
Yeah, no,
and to be doing this stuff to people.
Oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. It's interesting also because autism was not very big back then, right? Like the cases of autism were pretty rare. It's not like it is now where I think it's got to, 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 20 boys now have autism, which is horrible, right? But during this time, it was something that was not very common. So for them to get an autistic child and experiment on them was probably gold, because
they were just getting normal children to experiment on.
Yeah, but if they got an autistic kid here, because they did, right? So the therapeutic approach to children with autism.
Who knows what they're doing with all these autistic kids now?
Well, my theory of the autistic, I used to work with autistic kids a long time ago. It was quite interesting. But if you go back and look at, the vaccine schedule, which really gets ramped up in the mid 80s, it mirrors the rise of autism.
Right.
So, there tends to be a fairly interesting, and I have to watch my words here on YouTube, a fairly interesting correlation between the two, if you're looking at patterns. So she's able to get her hands on autistic kids who I think at that time were probably fairly rare. And
right.
In as much as, and this is the part that, it's like the iceberg. Like we're seeing the tip of the iceberg here. We're seeing what they can excavate and show us. What we don't see is what's beneath the surface. And I guarantee you, like with these kids and everything that they're doing brain mapping. They're cracking their skulls open. They're looking at the brains. They're slicing the brains. Right. This is how these people would operate. Right. Because they're trying to find maps here. They're trying to find ways in which to either diagnose and or put people into different states of either chaos or noise, so that they can repattern them. So the bottom of the iceberg here is probably even worse than what we're being shown.
Yeah. The other thing that Bender got into, she was involved in all the skullduggery imaginable, but she was heavy into the LSD experimentation.
Right.
And wrote papers that she considered the early work of Dr. Alfred Hubbard.
Yeah, Al Hubbard. Yeah.
Al Hubbard, Johnny Appleseed.
He was the Johnny Appleseed of LSD. Yeah.
Right. So he wasn't a doctor at all. He was just a dispenser.
Right.
He hoodwinked Sandoz into supplying him with ample doses of LSD and, put it into the counterculture.
Yeah. He would go to bars in San Francisco and he would dose guys, and they were usually sailors that were having some time out, right? Like doing the bar. So what's really interesting is I actually had a girlfriend whose father was involved in rounding those guys up from those bars in San Francisco. He didn't know the Hubbard side of things, but they sent him in to go to these places and deal with these guys. Right. So he was on the back end of the whole Hubbard experiment, and Hubbard would sit there and, watch them and take notes and, see what they were capable of. Yeah. And
there's an article that I wrote. I can consider it one of my best articles ever. It's really impactful. You can see the link there. It says, in plain view, jaw-dropping video of LSD promoters holding 1979 meeting. And it's Timothy Leary, Hubbard, Gottlieb, the whole crew.
Sidney Gottlieb.
Sitting around casually talking, confessing and talking about all this stuff.
Right.
I mean, if anybody that's serious about this topic needs to sit down and watch this video. You don't even have to necessarily even see my comments on it, but that meeting is like a revelation of what they were doing, and they were very pleased about it. And they admitted that the CIA and the crime syndicate was behind.
Oh, this is Sidney Cohen. This is not Sidney Blumenthal. And then Humphrey Osmond. Yeah.
So there's Bender involved with autism.
Right.
And Steve Silberman, the author of Neurotribes, sharply critical of Bender's therapeutic approach to children with autism. 50s and 60s, he told an interviewer that autistic kids were often subjected to seclusion, restraint, and physical punishment by clinicians who did not understand their condition. Well, she was a sadomasochist. She loved that.
Right.
The more experiments like that she could do, the merrier.
So you mentioned Willis Harman in this article.
The LSD promotion article.
Yeah. So Willis Harman is a very interesting character, and he winds up hooking up with Stanford Research Institute and a place called IONS, which was started by Edgar Mitchell, which is also known as the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which I've been to. I've been to IONS. And one of the things that Willis Harman was involved in, and you may want to do an article on this one book, Russ. It's called Changing Images of Man. And it was produced by Willis Harman, this other guy whose name I forget. It comes through Stanford Research Institute, and it's got a number of contributors, but one of the main contributors was Joseph Campbell. And Changing Images of Man is really like a research paper Bible for the time that we're living in. And one of the things that they come up with is that in order for humanity to take a quote unquote new evolutionary step, be corralled, and reach their higher function, is to come up with a new religion. And the new religion that they posit is the religion of the earth. And they get into this whole idea around Gaia. But they when you really boil it down, because look, people care about the environment. I care about the environment. I think it's an important thing. But when you boil it down, what you're able to get out of this work is the distillation for climate change, the green economy, the build back better, the doing something for the greater good. I mean, it's all baked in this, and you can find the PDF online. It's called Changing Images of Man, and it really is kind of like the Bible and the roadmap.
He just so happens to be at this LSD promoter meeting. What a coinky dink.
Well, Harman has been on the front lines of this stuff for a long time. And I think Changing Images of Man is towards the back end of his career. But yeah, I mean, the same players show up over and over again here, right? You talk about Wasson, who's another government agent.
Yeah, now during this meeting, Leary thanks I'm trying to remember his name, the publisher of Time.
Loose.
Yeah. Right there in the meeting, he just thanks him for all the propaganda and the promotion of their work.
Yeah. That book, Acid Dreams, is actually a really good book, by the way. If you want to understand the history of LSD and who the players are.
But if you want to see some guys doing some confessions before your very eyes, or you doubters out there that don't think this stuff is for real, this is some pretty good meat here.
Yeah. Then they talk about this drug called BZ in Acid Dreams. Do you remember that? BZ?
No.
Okay. So the government, the army, thought, well, they wanted to dose soldiers, which they did. And when they did, they found out that the soldiers weren't very interested in fighting. Like, they were more interested in, God and the universe and the molecular structure of their fingernail or whatever, right? So okay, well, this is interesting, but it doesn't achieve our goal. So what they did is they tinkered around with LSD, and they added a few things here, subtracted a few things there, and they came up with this drug called BZ, which is short for benzyl something xylothorine or something like that. And they actually used BZ in Vietnam. But the first time they used it, I think they used it domestically. And the effects of BZ were that the individual would have a clear psychotic break. And they would literally be on this high for like 72 hours with a clear psychotic break. And when it was all over, they didn't know what they did. And so they also found that individuals could become highly aggressive on it. And they're like, oh yeah, I think we found something here.
So classic mind control.
Yeah, because what they wanted to do is they wanted to find the magic pill so that they could deliver it to their soldiers who would become killing machines without a conscience. So they field tested this thing in Vietnam, and the results were horrific. They were horrific. That basically what happened is they had a small platoon just open fire on each other, and you know they couldn't tell who the enemy was or
again,
or wasn't.
Lord knows how much of this stuff is even unspoken, unreported.
Well, this came out, and there's a movie called Jacob's Ladder with Tim Robbins, which I highly recommend, even though it's a very dark movie that gets into this territory. It basically recounts this BZ. You don't really know it in the movie, but you'll find out about it. This BZ event that so all this stuff is going on during this time, right? Like it's just crazy. Operation Phoenix, that's all happening during the Vietnam War. All these experiments are going on. It was just a field day for these people.
Yeah, and then it's kind of a lead in this LSD gathering with Sidney Gottlieb is there. And
here's Gottlieb right here. Yeah. And Gottlieb is Mr. MK Ultra.
He's Mr. MK Ultra. So the MK Ultra, I have the next article is the Cornerstone article, it's called. An MK Ultra mind control headed by Gottlieb began on the order of CIA Director Allen Dulles on April 13, 1953, but its techniques dated back to World War II under the direction of Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, 1901 to 1967. And so the scope of MK Ultra was broad, 80 institutions, 44 colleges and universities, as well as hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated through these institutions using front organizations, although sometimes top officials were unaware of the CIA involvement. And investigative efforts were hampered by the fact that subsequent CIA Director Helms ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed in 1973. So we kind of get a partial extraction of
a little bit. It's a little show and tell there.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they basically burned everything. But the same thing with Cameron, right out of the Loretta Bender School of sensory deprivation, drugs, isolation.
Right.
Cameron, I have turning loose a monster. So here we go with this again. Cameron's claim to fame was torturing and experimenting on the minds of his human subjects. For this, he became, at least in his lifetime, a heavy hitter, demonstrating in spades the twisted, inverted world in which we live. In 1961, Cameron was appointed the president of the World Psychiatric Association.
He was a quack.
He was
Total
the president
quack.
of the World Psychiatric Association. He was also the president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Association. Talk about a turtle on a fence post.
Yeah. Cameron.
That's a CIA appointment.
Yeah.
That's a crime syndicate appointment.
Yeah.
So he experimented on his human guinea pigs with various paralytic drugs, such as the electroconvulsive therapy that we just discussed.
Yep.
But at 30 to 40 times the normal power. His driving experiments consisted of putting subjects into a drug-induced coma for weeks at a time while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements. So just torturing people.
Yep.
His experiments were typically carried out on patients who had entered the institute for minor problems, such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression. So he would just snatch just regular patients and experiment on them.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole
Totally
thing.
unethical.
Yeah. The whole thing with Cameron and McGill is very, very, very dark. Very dark. And what Russ is referring to is a technique called psychic driving, And psychic driving is a compendium of things like drugs, white noise, sleep deprivation. Essentially, they're breaking down the individual so that they can do whatever they want, right? They can either create a subpersonality, they can reprogram the person, they can watch what happens and make notes as the person deconstructs and goes into some form of regression. And those ideas of Cameron, I'm convinced, Russ, that they've been actually mainstreamed and that we live in a constant field of psychic driving now.
Yeah,
like our reality is a byproduct of psychic driving, and it has to do with the flood of information. A lot of people can't sleep, they have a hard time sleeping, whether it's because we're stressed out, maybe there are electronic signals that are being transmitted through the atmosphere.
There's a lot of what I call black magic, which is just strangeness. This strange, unbelievable things. And I sent you yesterday, kind of for laughs and giggles, this interview with this father of this.
We should play that.
I mean, it's just come on, really?
Yeah,
that's black magic. What are you pulling on people? That's not real.
This is a result of collective psychic driving, where people are losing their minds. They're being
fed this stuff and asked to believe that it's real. And it's
right.
And if you don't accept it, you're considered a kook.
Right. The psychic driving is the creation of a disassociative state, is really what it is.
Black magic, using black magic and high weirdness, high strangeness, as you call it.
Yeah. I tell you, I'm going to play this video with this father, which is so bizarre. But there is a name that we kind of glossed over a little bit as we went through your various articles. And that's John Lilly, Dr. John Lilly.
Right.
And if anybody's ever seen the movie with William Hurt, what's the name of the movie? Oh, shoot, now I'm blanking on it. I usually know this stuff at the top of my head. Hold on now. We got to go into the other mind. Hold on.
It's interesting how they make movies derived from this stuff.
Oh, it's famous. It's a famous movie. It's Altered States. I mean, even before I type it in, I got it. Altered States is about John. It's William Hurt plays a John Lilly character, and it's taking place, I believe, at Harvard, and he's really involved in things like sensory deprivation and trying to achieve these mind states, right? And eventually he runs across this guy, Salvador Roquette, who hooks him up with psilocybin, mescaline, and then ultimately LSD. And so he starts to do these sensory deprivation tanks, high on acid. And that starts everything off. Now, Lilly, of course, is connected to the Lilly Merck pharmaceutical.
Oh, really?
Fortune. Oh, yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So
more Sabatier Francus.
So back in the 80s, when I used to be in the music business, John Lilly's name was kind of floating around because he was doing a lot of stuff with whales, right, and dolphins, and kind of whale and dolphin sounds were sort of starting to permeate like music, and so Lilly's name would come up. And I met this woman who had gone to see John Lilly in Hawaii, and she said, the minute I got there, he saw me and he took out his wang and started to masturbate right in front of me. Right. Like that's where his head was at. Right.
That's the Freudian influence.
I know. Right. Like that's how far gone he was, and back in the day, we would think of people like John Lilly as being almost like counterculture heroes because, you know, their fearless exploration of these deep psychic states. And then you come to find out that he's really nothing more than a drooling vegetable who, you know, takes out his weenie the minute some fairly attractive woman walks through his door and feels like he can get away with it. And that's the byproduct of this.
You know, I was going to add about you and Cameron. A lot of his stuff has been revealed. So the information's come out, and you can see a little bit of that. There's a Fifth Estate documentary done by Canadian Public Broadcasting a few years back. Really good. It's called The Sleep Room.
Right.
Fifth Estate, where they go into the abuses at McGill College, where Cameron did all these experiments.
Right.
So that's in my article. It's, you know, it's longer, so you can, if you want to take the time to look at it. But you know, so he began working with the Office for Strategic Services. That's where he came.
The
out
OSS, right?
So they come out of Intel,
right? You know who's got an interesting connection to McGill is Leonard Cohen, the singer-songwriter. Have you ever gone down the Leonard Cohen rabbit hole?
Oh, I mean, I've heard some of his music, but no, what's that all about?
Oh no, Leonard Cohen is a player. Like he's a big time player. So first of all, Leonard Cohen, a lot of people don't know this, but Leonard Cohen was a member of the IDF.
Yeah.
Yep. Leonard Cohen was a Zionist, right?
Yep.
And so he has
all this stuff overlaps.
So he has this interesting connection with McGill University and Cameron. And I used to be friends with this woman named Ann Diamond. And Ann, I did an interview with Ann one time, and she was Leonard Cohen's lover. And she was very clear that Leonard Cohen was a handler and that she was somebody that was being handled by him. I have no reason to doubt her. Henry Mackow has written a couple of stories on Anne. And so she has a lot of information on Leonard Cohen. And there's this really interesting documentary where they have this concert, Isle of Wight, which I believe is an experiment. Like Isle of Wight is at the end of the festivals of the 60s, right? And everything just goes wrong during Isle of Wight. Bad acid, right? And even the Isle of Wight itself has like weird kind of supernatural connections, and everything just goes off the rails. And Leonard Cohen comes on, and Leonard Cohen, I'm convinced, practices a form of NLP on everybody at that concert and puts them all in a trance. Like that's how like highly trained Leonard Cohen is. And what's his name? The Miles Mathis, whose work I mostly like. One of the things that he did that I thought was actually quite good was he tried to figure out who really was the author of Bob Dylan's songs. Because if you follow the career of Dylan, his output does not match certain periods of time.
Kind of like a Shakespeare. Huh?
Yeah, right. And some people say, well, you know, that's just how no, not really. Some people act like, whether you like him or not, and he was a CIA wonk, Ernest Hemingway wrote his stuff the entirety of his life, you know. But so he drilled down on the lyrics, Dylan's lyrics, and he's like, okay, based on these lyrics, which often have these biblical references, there's really only two people at that time that were capable of writing those lyrics. One was Paul Simon, and the other was Leonard Cohen. And through a series of deduction, he's convinced that it's Leonard Cohen. And so Cohen is tied into this thing in a really interesting way.
Leonard Cohen has one song I really like. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Where he's talking about we take over New York, and
first we take New York, then we take Berlin.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. Pretty wild lyrics.
Russ, you're the incredibly shrinking man again.
Oh, I am. Sorry.
That's our code.
Okay.
The incredibly shrinking man. you gotta raise it up a little bit or lower it, whichever way it goes.
But in this, I don't think we can cover it. But if anybody wants to read a little bit more about some of Cameron's activities, he was tied in with experimenting on Rudolf Hess.
Oh yeah, that was a really interesting article.
I don't know. We can't really fit that into the show, but I would recommend people read that because it kind of shows how they operated.
That was really interesting. And that
they did a number on him.
Right. And was that like front loading the Nuremberg trial? Is that what that was about?
Well, they had a live one. They had, one of the top Nazis who just, of course, showed up in Scotland trying to save the world. He was kind of on a very idealistic and thought that he could cut a deal and make peace and save.
Wasn't he also in contact with Crowley? I think he was in contact with Crowley too.
Who? Cameron?
Hess. No, Hess.
No, I think Hess was on a peace mission, but he was kind of naive.
Right.
And once they got a hold of him, they turned him over to Cameron and sort of Cameron's crew of these British psychiatrists, and then they basically did psychic driving on him and drove him crazy.
Right.
And but Hess is really a tough guy. He would kind of snap out of it at times.
Yeah, he looks like
an incredible story that nobody even knows about. But I wrote the article on it, but it's kind of in depth. I don't think we can really go into that now. But it's
look at this dude. I mean, that guy's a bulldog.
Who, Hess?
Yeah, look at that face.
Yeah, he was known as the conscience of National Socialism. Everybody thought he was like the most angelic of the whole bunch.
Right. Interesting. And so they wanted to make sure that they could get their psychic hooks in them.
Yeah, and paint him as crazy Hess narrative to deflect away from his peace mission.
Right.
And Cameron was tasked with removing Hess's memory of past events. So they got him so he couldn't really recognize his colleagues at the trials. Van Ribbentrop responded by suggesting Hess was not really Hess. When told of something that Hess had said, he replied, "Hess? You mean Hess? The Hess that we have here?" When he came face to face with Hermann Goering, Hess remarked, "Who are you?" Goering reminded him of events that they'd witnessed in the past, but Hess continued to insist that he did not know this man. Things like that. And then there's there's this psychiatric enigma of Rudolf Hess on YouTube, where a bunch of these jerks, psychoanalysts, decide to take it on themselves to psychoanalyze Rudolf Hess and don't know crap about where he'd been institutionalized, the psychic driving he'd been through, the drugging.
Right.
They're just yucking it up. This experiment they did on Rudolf Hess, just disgusting.
Right.
But worth watching. Just to show the mentality, the Osher lifelong learning center.
It's interesting. When I was in college and studying English literature, this is back in the 80s. Like the big rave in terms of modern critical theory was called the new school of criticism, and it comes out of Chicago University, Lionel Trilling and these people. And then I always thought, like, when it was talked about in college, I thought it was insane, actually, because what the new school of modern criticism is about is, like, you take away the historical context of everything. Like, so if there's a literary work, you just look at the work itself in this kind of hermetically sealed vacuum. And I thought to myself, well, that's nuts. Like, how can you not, like, if you're going to read Pound's cantos, you can't understand the cantos without understanding Pound's life and who he hung out with and where he grew up, because there's references to all of it. And it's the same thing here with Hess, right? Like, how can you understand who this man is or was without the context, without the background, without the historical facts.
Well, it's just so much
what he
easier
went
just to
through.
say this. So much easier to say, oh, he flew to Scotland and went and it was crazy. That's. I mean, even Hitler.
Well, I'm
talked
talking about these guys on YouTube
Yeah,
who were taking a whack at him, right?
this
Because-
is what I said. I said, as the people in the audience yucked it up, we learned by sheer coinkydink that hospital records. I mean, I'm just sitting here listening to these guys.
right.
The hospital records admit to giving true serums and observing patient paranoia and atypical amnesia that made no sense. Paranoid Hess thought he had been given neurotoxins in his food. And then I have see the use of neurotoxin fluoride for influencing brain function. He
Right.
stated, so Hess is very smart and seemed to be very aware. He stated that he was worked over by strange, glassy-eyed, freakish individuals that he called, that in his so-called paranoia, he felt were Jews. He knew he knew what drugs were administered to Hess, but this is not too dissimilar to what McGill's victims described. So they did the McGill treatment on him.
Right.
Said,
I mean,
where have we
they-
heard this
yeah.
before? McGill, Ewan Cameron. Yes, that's the ticket. If it wasn't Cameron directly, and Ewan Cameron was dropping in on this stuff, it was his
Right.
colleagues at this hospital.
Right.
And then we
right.
learned that Hess, once in prison, once he kind of got away from this environment and just kind of got left alone,
Yeah.
he started writing lucid, poetic letters home and demonstrated reasonable memory. Then they go into why Hess, right as he's about to declare not fit to stand trial, suddenly proclaimed he was fine, had been pulling a ruse. But there's even logic to that if you considered he wanted to stay in the limelight rather than go back to Cameron's torturous experiments. So put yourself in Hess's shoes. You know, I want to go to trial. I want to stay in front of the public.
Right.
Hess wrote to Oswald Mosley. This is kind of worth talking about. I have been in prison for 4 years now with lunatics and have been at the mercy of their torture without being able to inform anyone of this. But the worst for the doctors who employ their scientific knowledge for the most refined tortures. I was given reports by British consulates about the treatment of Jews in Germany, according to Jews. I was told I was being treated like the Gestapo treats their political enemies. It was typical of the Jews to claim that their enemies did what they did to themselves. Apart from the chemical that caused toothache, there was unmistakably a strong laxative and a poison that irritated the mucous membranes in the strongest possible manner. Well, remember Freud is into this mucous membrane shit. Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
The last was responsible for my nose stopping itself up with congealed blood, that I had a hemorrhage in my mouth, and that my bowels burned like fire. The doctors could not hide his satisfaction when there were signs of hemorrhaging in my intestines. They had been hypnotized to torture until I became crazy, and finally to kill me, to do everything in such a manner that nothing could possibly be proven, and that my complaints would be explained by auto-suggestion. That's Hess to Oswald Mosley.
Mm-hmm.
At the trial, Hess faded in and out. It was not overly just, because remember, he was a consummate political infighter with a high degree of cleverness, even in his reduced states. Some of the survivors of Cameron's mad science at McGill were the same way, exact same way. They kind of tried to trick their way out of it. There's a very informative interview that in this article with the former American warden, Eugene Bird, who became a close friend of Hess. Wrote the book about Hess's imprisonment entitled The Loneliest Man in the World. And he described Hess as very introverted, isolated, but lucid in his old age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they were going to release him at about the age of 93, but the theory is that they just murdered him.
Right. Wow. Very
Yeah, it's
intense.
it's quite a story. It's kind of hidden history.
Yeah, for sure. So
And it ties in with the psychic driving experimentation stuff. And then,
Right.
and then, of course, the Russians did a lot of this on the Romanian fascists that they captured after the end of World War II. They had what they call hard cases.
Yeah.
And they experimented on them, mostly just torturing him, excruciating pain.
Right. Well, this has been a really uplifting episode, Russ. post Thanksgiving. We have a lot to be thankful for, apparently. So let's try to tie all this together a little bit here. Let's see if we can bring the loose ends together. We have the faulty foundation of psychoanalytic theory based on one man's obsessions and perversions and a hardcore desire for cocaine and money, right? And also with forays into things like electroshock therapy, also known as Sigmund Freud. We have Freud. Then we have the descendants of Freud, like Anna Freud in the military industrial complex. And then we have these other various offshoots where these people aren't really psychoanalytical figures, but they are engaged in what I would call like the militarization of the subconscious, right? Which is the psychic driving, the split personality, trauma-based applications. And we could make a case here that it all comes out of Freud in a lot of ways. Like, I think it goes further back a little bit. I don't want to muddy the waters, but for the 20th century, Freud brings us to that place and the launching pad where there's just a lot of immoral justification.
Yeah, just degenerate behavior too.
Yeah, degenerate behavior,
torture, degenerate behavior, just just wiping out people's minds.
Right. And whether or not people actually knew that Freud was carrying on, essentially a professional forgery. Some of the methodologies that Freud employed,
drug dealing,
I'm sure they knew about. And it's like, well, why don't we piggyback on this a little bit? And this stuff has been going on for a long time. I mean, once they were able to set up things like sanitariums and mental institutions, it was fair game on humanity. It's like once they went through those doors, you were good luck, right? Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, they had other ways of doing. Dave McGowan talked about this. They had other ways of doing psychic driving and black magic in the population, like in the 70s, because they would get these prospective serial killers in these institutions,
right,
and then just turn them loose on society.
Well, that's what happened with Manson.
Yeah,
Manson was institutionalized. Went through the whole boys club thing and prison and then it shows up in San Francisco and then later LA in the 60s, and voila, there you go, ready big.
California was a hotbed of just releasing these serial killers into society to create havoc. And
I was there as a kid.
They just let them go. They just turned them loose.
Yeah, I was there. I remember when this is after Manson was running around. I think it might have been the early 70s, right around 73, 74, about 74. And Reagan had shut down Agnew State Hospital. And Agnew was where, a lot of people who had issues were holed up. So Reagan, of course, wanted to be the first governor to balance the budget. So he whacked a lot of the mental health services. And all of a sudden, all these people just started showing up. They had nowhere to go.
And they're doing it again by emptying the prisons. Who knows what's out there right now?
That's a whole other show. I mean, I remember if we go back to like 2015. In 2015, San Francisco had a homeless problem, but it wasn't epic. Portland had a bit of a homeless problem, but it wasn't epic. Seattle had a homeless problem on the verge of getting epic. That was around 2015. People started to become aware of what was going on in these cities. Fast forward 6 years later, It is an epidemic. And it's just mind blowing. Like whenever I think about it,
and what's pushing this is the same kind of people that pushed the serial killers of the 70s, the Ewan Cameron nonsense, the whole program.
well, it's also
has continuity.
It's also a form of psychic driving, right? I mean, instead of like being bombarded with, frequencies and sleep deprivation, what are you bombarded with? Like if you live in one of these cities or in proximity, you are bombarded by images of poverty, insanity, a lack of hygiene, right? That is an assault on your senses. And for a while, it was kind of bundled up in these West Coast progressive cities. And now it's metastasized and it's everywhere now, right? This problem is everywhere. And of course, we have fentanyl, we have all these drugs that contribute to it. And, you're looking at a bunch of people who are the byproduct of not only a form of psychic driving, which sent them onto the streets.
And trust me, the whole thing behind fentanyl is contrived. That can be dealt with. That's not some accident. That's not some, what a quinky dink. Nothing to see here, move along.
Oh, no, it's so one of the reasons why the United States got out of Afghanistan is because they didn't need the poppy fields anymore.
Right.
Fentanyl basically is synthetic heroin, right? Synthetic opium. So they figured out how to do this thing without having to grow these plants. Like, okay, we're done here. We have our narcotic for our age now, and it's fentanyl. So all of this is a byproduct of social psychic driving, which then feeds on itself and becomes another layer of the psychic driving that people have to deal with now. And it's really it's unfortunate because we let these people get by without any kind of oversight, without any kind of check and balance. I mean, even Fauci is a byproduct of that, right? I mean, he's lower level in terms of the program, but don't kid yourself. He was a maestro with the wand from 2020 on, right? And it's another guy without any checks and balances and without any oversight. And this is what's happened with science and research in this country.
Yep, they become criminal enterprises to run these agendas, these
exactly.
MK Ultra type agendas.
Exactly. They're almost like the scientific seal of approval, right, to run these agendas, these big time crime. Well, we're going to need a high priest of science in order to do this. So let's bring these people in. And in the meantime, there's always some program running in the background to further their cause. So what do we do, Russ? How do we deal?
A lot of people are going to have to wake the fuck up.
Yeah.
But that's suppressed too, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is not frontline news. The mainstream media doesn't touch it at all.
Right.
If they do, it's like 30 years ago, the Canadian Broadcasting, exposing McGill, and somehow it's still on YouTube. I don't quite understand that. So some flunky at YouTube failed to take the video down. That's kind of my best explanation.
So there's this documentary that just came out recently, which I've not watched, and it was put together by, I think, Stu Peters and that whole scene.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's called Died Suddenly. And apparently Elon Musk will not allow anybody to retweet it, post a link to it, right? And already 7 million people have watched it. Whatever you think of Stu Peters, and I have mixed feelings about Stu Peters.
Well, see, when Elon Musk does that, it's what's her name? Got the Barbara Streisand effect.
Right.
People go, well, I got to go see this.
Right.
That's how I react. That's how I react.
No, I agree with you.
So in some ways, I think that Elon Musk maybe knows what he's doing.
I think Elon Musk is in the camp, not our camp. He's in the camp. I mean, he just basically turned Twitter's community control over to the ADL. Okay,
but he's going to let all these banned accounts back next week, and I suppose the effect of that is then you can say, "Wow, look what a mess we have now," and then bring back controls. That seems like
it seems like a problem reaction solution,
right? Because you bring back all the fake accounts and all the truly crazy actors that have been on Twitter in the past that have been removed. Let them come back, and then this is look what this does to the community. Now we have to put in controls.
But he's not going to bring back Alex Jones.
Not going to bring back Alex Jones. I'd be curious to see like if he brings back Henry McCaw. I wrote Henry McCaw. I said, you need to get back on Twitter, and he agreed. He said, "Why don't you write Elon Musk?" I said, "Well, Henry, I don't think he's going to listen to me." Well, but maybe next week Henry will be back on. So I think that's a benefit. So you get the benefit of that.
I would love to see Henry back on there.
Yeah,
I loved his Twitter feed. Yep. He had a great Twitter feed, and by not having here's okay. This is just a personal piece. Is that by not having his Twitter feed, he's kind of turned his website into story and Twitter feed. I think he's kind of copying Jim Stone a little bit in terms of how he distributes the information down his page, which I'm not sure is always the best. I preferred it when he would do one story, right, and then he had a Twitter feed with all of it.
The thing is that doing one story is tough. I've done that for a long time. I was pretty prolific at that.
Yeah.
And it gets hard after a while.
No, I understand that, which is why having a Twitter feed is a good thing. You just, bang, right? And I do like Henry in his work. Although there are times that I think that he's like, well, okay, yeah, I'm a Jew and the Jews are culpable, but don't forget the Freemasons. Got to mention the Freemasons too.
He doesn't let the Jews off the hook though at all.
No. Of everybody out there, Henry is probably, besides Brother Nathaniel, probably two of the harshest critics of their own culture, which I would agree. And
I'm a very harsh critic of Americans. I have to tell you that. And I think some people don't like it. I use terms like satanic. Sorry.
Well, Americans, unfortunately, have been conditioned to be lazy, take their lives for granted, take their information from sort of the worst sources and not have to work for it or think through it. Some of it is a byproduct of the system. Some of it is a byproduct of economic privilege in a lot of ways. But I would say by and large, the majority of the country has let the minority of the country take the reins, and that's not a good thing.
No.
And when I say the minority, I'm not talking about minorities as a group.
Yeah, you're talking about a criminal element.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But I think, and I tend to be a little objective. I think it's hard. Like if I was just, regular Joe American and I was trying to find my information and watch Fox News and, think that I was informed and without kind of having gone through what I've gone through, I think it'd be really, really difficult to try to get to the heart of the matter. And even Fox News, like, they weren't really clear on what their, in fact, no, I take that back. They were clear when it came to COVID-19 and vaccinations. And they were all in, right? I mean, they were all in. Even Tucker for a while was all in.
What about this FTX trading story? That's really
God,
amazing. That's
we
cost people a lot of money.
we could
That
spend
was
2
just so
hours.
blatant.
We could spend 2 hours on that thing.
Yeah, we probably should actually, but yeah, I wrote an article on that, the FTX loot, and what a bunch of sleazy individuals. And they're still being protected. They're going to be inviting this guy back to a conference here, and the New York Times is putting on, and
Right. Yeah, he's going to be at that conference.
Maxine Waters, who blew the guy kisses, and her.
Oh, and she's going to investigate him.
She could investigate him, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
This is going to be a real example for anybody that cares to look at how things work,
right?
Just how corrupted the system is. Because this guy's absconded with the money.
He has no conscience,
and he's not going to pay for it.
No, he has no conscience.
Why hasn't he
whatsoever.
been arrested?
Well,
why hasn't he been arrested?
We know the answer to that. Come on.
Yeah, he's protected by the criminal class.
I said this on my show a couple of weeks ago. Somebody's gonna kill him.
Yeah, he's the second largest donor to the Democratic Party.
Right. Oh yeah, he gave a shit ton to the Democrats.
He's money laundering for the Ukrainians, so he's involved in so much.
Yeah,
and his lifestyle and he's basically got a harem and the Bahamas.
Well, they had a weird little clique there of these
degenerates.
They were geeks. They were just geeks, and they were high on meth, and they were into some kind of weird, poly thing,
right?
Where they were all doing cuddle puddles and all kinds of crazy cosplay shit, and nobody really when you drill down. And I think the guy who oversaw the end of Enron is now the CEO of FTX, right? He's actually come forward with information about the company, and it's fucking startling.
Well, his legal counsel that he had, so-called legal counsel, a guy named, what was his name? Feinberg.
Yeah.
What a quinky dink. Feinberg.
Right.
Feinberg has previously been involved in a scam involving online gambling that he got in trouble for. So this character, God, I keep trying to remember.
Well, one of his lawyers,
Bankman
Fried.
Bankman Fried brings in this Friedberg. I think Friedberg's behind the whole thing. I think he's the main guy.
Then you have her parents, his parents. They're connected to the Clintons and Gary Gensler. I mean, these are all like very high level.
And Gensler, for people who don't know it, is the SEC commissioner,
the SEC.
And he's been involved in a lot. He's been involved in a lot of shit going all the way back to 2008. He's a criminal.
So some of the inner workings of FTX have been revealed. They had no board meetings. They did everything via Telegram and text. And in Telegram, your texts disappear in 48 hours or 72 hours. So they're making all these decisions via Telegram, and they're all gone. There's like no record of anything, right? And apparently, if you were an FTX employee and you submitted an expense report, you would submit it via Telegram, and you were given an emoji as to whether or not it was accepted or not, right? So they were like doing corporate shtick with emojis, and the whole thing was just completely Mickey Mouse. But they did it for a reason, because they didn't want any paper trail. There's no paper trail whatsoever. There's none. It's all just gone.
Well, they set up this bogus trading account through this 29-year-old girle.
Yeah, Alameda.
Alameda, it's Carolyn. And by the way, the symbols of the Alameda trading.
Pedophile. It's a pedophile symbol.
Pedophiles on both of them.
Yeah.
And the symbol on Bankman's shirt.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about in your face black magic.
Yeah. 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 No, it's the whole FTX is just a black hole, right? And even the way that they created the value for FTX is right out of the fiat banking playbook, right? Oh, we'll create our own token, just like we'll create our own currency. We'll create the FTT, and we'll trade an FTT, and we'll actually profit in FTT trades because we're the ones creating FTT. And they bought the parents, by the way, the parents of these kids, they own places down in the Bahamas. Okay.
Yeah, Stanford law professors, his mom and dad.
Right. They own.
You don't know any better. You don't know any better than that. Really?
And they paid for
and politically connected. We're supposed to give you guys a pass too.
They paid for these houses. Half of the payment for the houses was in the FTT token. Right. So they're basically paying, they're using nothing.
Yeah. I mean, the way they looted the money is they had this young girl who's idiot. If you ever see an interview,
she's an idiot.
She had no idea what she's talking about, going out and trading this stuff. And that's the conduit to they're passing it on to their criminal friends. They're making political donations. They have a bunch of criminal friends, a racket around the world to feed money into.
Yep.
And it just kind of disappears because these tokens they're hard to track. That's the whole idea.
Right. But then they're also worthless too, because there's nothing backing up the token.
But if you can get rid of them before everybody realizes they're worthless, before the Ponzi collapses.
Well, that's what Binance did. That's what Binance basically sold off all their tokens. And once they sold off all their tokens, all the collateral and liquidity was gone. And so why did Binance do that? Because Sam Bankman-Fried was having discussions with lawmakers in Washington, D.C. to essentially freeze out people like the guy from Binance. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Binance guy said, "Screw you. I'm
I
pulling the plug."
I know what you're up to, Bankman.
Yeah, and then that's what set all the dominoes going downhill, right?
But if that whole incident doesn't make you skeptic about financial things and everything else, then there's nothing I can do for you.
There's nothing
I can do to help you. Just go back to sleep, pajama person.
So $3 billion go out, and at the end of the day, what did they have left? They had $656,000 in assets. That was it.
But Bankman's free, and he's going to be going to New York to participate in a Rogues Gallery conference with.
Did you see who's on that? Did you see who's on that?
I have a list. Yeah, it's amazing.
So all of them fit a particular profile except one guy. Do you know who that guy is?
No.
Mike Pence.
Yeah, what's he doing there, right? He's involved. Maybe he's involved in this stuff more than people realize.
I think we're seeing the real Mike Pence, by the way. I think whoever he played the part to be in Trump's administration.
Mike, are you really going to go on stage with this Bankman guy? Really? None of these people are going to say, "No, sorry, I don't want to attend." No, nobody wants to be judgmental. Everybody wants to be positive. And this is black magic, where you get to a point where you can't criticize or be seen being hateful towards this criminal.
Meanwhile, we got to talk about this a little bit, though. Meanwhile, you have Kanye West. And Kanye West, have you seen the debrief, the Kanye West debrief from Mar-a-Lago? Have you seen that?
No.
All right, I'm going to play this. I want people to see this. So Kanye West went to Mar-a-Lago to meet Trump, and he asked Trump
recently?
He asked Trump to be his vice president.
And Trump saw him?
Oh, yeah. Well, they've got a history together, right? So I got to play this.
Interesting.
Now keep in mind the guy that he's with is Milo Yiannopoulos,
Yeah.
whom he's now Kanye is also hanging out with Nick Fuentes,
Jeez.
who is basically like about as, well, first of all, he's Hispanic, but he's about as separatist as it gets.
Yeah, he's never been friendly towards Trump. He's been sort of a renegade.
No, at one point he really liked Trump, but he turned on Trump.
Right.
So anyway, I think he might have brought Nick Fuentes to Mar-a-Lago with him. I watched this. This
Weird
is
story. Wow.
Watch this. This is incredible, actually.
I think the thing that Trump was most perturbed about, me asking him to be my vice president, I think that was like lower on the list of things that caught him off guard. It was the fact that I walked in with intelligence. So Trump is really impressed with Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes, unlike so many of the lawyers and so many people that he was left with on his 2020 campaign, he's actually a loyalist. When he didn't know what the lawyers is, you'll still have your lawyer list. And when all the lawyers said, forget it, Trump's done, there were loyalists running up in the White House, right? And my question would be, why, when you had the chance, did you not free the January 6ers? And I came to him as someone who loves Trump, and I said, go and get Corey back. Go and get these people that the media tried to cancel and told you to step away from. He basically gives me this would-be mob-esque kind of story, talking to some kid from the south side of Chicago trying to sound mobby or whatever. He goes into the story about all that he went through to get Alice Johnson out of jail and how he didn't do it for Kim, but he did it for me. But then he goes on to say that Kim is a you could tell her I said that. And I was thinking, like, that's the mother of my children. Since we know, and all the Christians in America that love Trump know that Trump is a conservative, we're going to demand that you hold all policies directly to the Bible. When Trump started basically screaming at me at the table, telling me I was going to lose, I mean, has that ever worked for anyone in history? Telling me
You're going to lose. Tell him he's going to lose.
I'm like, well, hold on, Trump. You're talking to Ye.
Crazy.
All right, look at Milo Yiannopoulos' eyes, though. He's like fucking tweaking on something. Look at him. He's gotten rid of the phony blonde hair that he used to have, and he's got that grindy tweaker jaw right now. Look at him. He's got his eyes rolling back in his head and everything. I mean, look at he's kind of high as fuck here. Sorry. But is this a story or what?
What a bunch of drama queens.
I mean, but you got to admit, though, I mean, Kanye is probably one of the most entertaining people on the planet right now. I mean, he's totally entertaining. Whatever you think of him, he's entertaining. And he's going to ask Trump, well, how come you didn't free these people? Like, who else has ever asked Trump that question?
Fair question.
It's a very fair question. Right. And then Trump comes back and calls his wife a fucking hoe or bitch or something. But
Trump doesn't have the authority to do anything now. He's not in power.
Not now. No, not now. But Kanye went there to ask Trump if he'd be his vice president.
And Trump saw him and spoke with him.
and then now, okay. Now he says he's a big fan and big supporter of Nick Fuentes, right? And it's like, if Trump's critics didn't have enough gasoline already to throw in the fire, Kanye just gave him the petroleum plant right there, right? And it's like, by
mentioning Nick Fuentes, he puts Nick Fuentes on the map. So they've got some kind of a plan for him, apparently. There has to be some reason behind this sort of mad behavior.
Kanye,
how would you like Ye to mention you publicly? What can you imagine?
I'd love it, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, same with
I'd
me.
love it.
Nick Fuentes.
Yeah. So it's like Kanye is putting together like if this were a comic book, he would be rounding up all of these supposed super villains to be on his like Avengers, right? Because apparently he's having all these conversations with Owen Benjamin too. So Kanye, Owen Benjamin
is pretty good. I like him.
So he Kanye, Owen Benjamin, and Nick Fuentes and Milo Yiannopoulos. All right, this is your new truth squad right here.
Yeah.
Get ready. Get ready. If this
there's worse. There's worse.
I think I listen.
Not a bad little crew.
Listen, if we're gonna go through Samsara, at least have me entertained, right? at least have me entertained through Samsara, and upset some apple carts.
And they're all sort of they're called anti-Semites. They're really just kind of borderline critics, but they're
right. Yeah,
they criticize certain things. They're really not anti-Semites at all. Whatever an anti-Semite is, all four characters you mentioned.
Right. Well, that's what I'm talking about, right? Although Milo's Jewish, his mother's Jewish,
right?
So his father is what Greek Orthodox or something like that. So I think does Milo get the pass? I don't know. Well, listen, Russ, it's been a great show, and we've covered a lot of ground today. And I think the takeaway here is the Freudian foundation for what we would call professional quackery, deviance, and a lot of that being used as cover to build on these other systems where people kind of piggyback on accreditation and titles and coming out of a certain tradition, while beneath it all, they're literally running these state-sponsored programs in experimentation, mind control, and torture. And Freud is kind of the bedrock for that.
And the thing is that we've been exposing this all along. So we've created a body of work already. John Money, Alfred Kinsey. I can't even remember who we've talked about. But I think the Freud thing is important because that's a good foundation. We probably should have started with that. We should have started with that, but it spins off into these other characters that we've already done the work on. So you can listen to our prior shows, right, and get the same tenor, because this is what we're doing. We're coming back every month and exposing this type of thing. Well, that's been the thrust of our shows.
Maybe next month we could kind of bring it into the present and look at somebody like Harley Pasternak, who is supposedly Kanye's trainer, right? Yeah. And Harley Pasternak.
Who the hell is he?
Well, he comes out of Canadian military, right? He's got contracts with the Canadian military, doing experiments with Canadian soldiers on modafinil and a bunch of other stuff. So maybe we could kind of bring this forward and take a look at Harley Pasternak and modern methods of mind control that are still floating around now.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Russ, I certainly hope that you round into shape very quickly, and your life achieves some homeostasis here. And it's always a pleasure having you once a month.
Good to be back and back in the world of the living. So to see you in a month.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Russ Winter, find him at winterwatch.net. That's right. It's .net, right? Winterwatch.net. Puts up fresh content on a regular basis. It should be one of the first websites you go to check out what Russ and his team are putting together there. I know Henry Mackow does. I think it's on his top of the morning list. So I'd put it right there too. Russ, have a great month. We'll be in touch on Twitter, and you take care, okay?
Okay, see ya. Bye-bye.
All right. The great Russ Winter joining us once again. And we're back here where we should be, no longer in exile, over on Robert Phoenix and Astro Plus. Anyway, I want to thank you for being here today and participating just by watching the show. And we'll be back on Sunday night, and a pretty good show lined up for you on Sunday night. We're going to be looking at a number of different things related with conjunctions and how conjunctions are an incredibly important part of astrology. And particularly going to look at some individuals. I have a little third eye thing going on here. Individuals that have some powerful conjunctions in their chart, and how they play out in their chart. One of them is going to be Donald Trump and the Sun Uranus conjunction. And by the way, this is not a bash the Trump show on Sunday night, but I am going to look at the conjunction of Uranus and the Sun, particularly in the sign of Gemini, and have another Uranus Sun Gemini character that we're going to look at, who is very, very different than Trump, but it's worthwhile because the Sun Uranus conjunction is close in the degree of their conjunction. We'll get into that on Sunday night. Very different kind of persona and a very interesting contrast to Trump's chart. Of course, we'll look at other people as well. We'll look at the chart of the moment, and we'll look ahead to Sagittarius. So, for myself and of course the AstroCat over here, who's just given us a rear end shot. Show the world your handsomeness. Show the world how handsome you are. Oh, he's a little pissed off. Now, are you feeling better now? You feeling better? Yeah. Yeah. Anything you want to say to anybody before we get out of here? Anything you want to say? Or you're gonna do kind of the silent effect today? This would be silent. All right. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart, too simple as possible. Don't forget to hit the like button. I never tell people to do that. I watch all these YouTube shows, and it's like, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and pass the show along if you like it. We'll see you guys on Sunday night. And use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart, too simple as possible. For myself, Jasper, and Russ Winter, we wish you a very happy Thanksgiving.